What's up, YouTube? Kenneth Lowe here for Artivation Media. Today we're talking vocal processing. Stick around. All right, we're going to start off with a brief synopsis here, and then you can use the timestamps in the description to hop to the subjects that interest you. So first, we'll dual mic our subject. Then we'll route those tracks down to buses. Next, we'll apply a high-pass filter with some stereoization to one channel, and then a vocal writing plugin to the second to smooth things out, and then freeze those to save processor. If you're stacking vocals, you want to align them. Next, we'll move on to some pitch correction in an editing software similar to Melodyne. After that, we'll use multiple stages of compression, ending with saturation, and finally, some delay, followed by multiple stages of reverb to round everything out. So what you're looking at here is a dynamic mic made by Shure. It actually predates the SM58. It's got fairly good low end, a buttery smooth midsection, but it lacks some detail in the high end. So for that reason, on the right-hand side here, I've got a large diaphragm MXL studio condenser. This is not a high-end microphone by any stretch of the imagination. It's very muddy, overly bassy, but it has a lot of detail in the high end, which is what we want. And then to round out the setup, we have a relatively decent quality pop filter. So the first step is we want to get everything routed correctly. So as you can see, we've got her first take here, and this is on that silver mic, and I've got it with a little bit of a silver color. And then down on my mixer, this is the corresponding mixer track. And so here's the MXL and the corresponding MXL track, and so on and so forth. So let's just mute our first take. And we're going to mute the dynamic mic and only listen to just that condenser so you can hear the mud that I'm talking about with this microphone.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So very dirty. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and turn on the effects here. And we'll just take a look at the high pass filter. So I've got a high pass at about 6K, and I'll let you hear what that sounds like.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So not much of that signal is being saved. It's only the high end, only the air. And the reason that I'm doing it this way, instead of just summing everything together and then boosting the high end, is because I want to add a stereoizer that only affects the air of the vocal. And so this gives you a bigger, wider sounding vocal without actually stereoizing the whole thing and losing that mono presence. So I'll take a listen to it again with the stereoizer on.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
All right, so now let's hop over to the dynamic channel. Unmute this and toggle our effects on. And as you can see, I've got a vocal writer here. So this is going to start to smooth out the volume of this vocal before we even apply any kind of dynamics processing to it. It's just going to kind of bring up the low spots and bring down the high spots. So now we'll take a listen to the dynamic mic just by itself.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So now let's bring in that air from the MXL and see what we got.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So that gives us a lot. That gives us the high end texture, but it also gives us the smooth mid range and the smooth low end. So we've done the same to these two channels as well. So now with all these effects on, we're ready to start processing. So working with these channels all independently like this can start to get cumbersome, and it can weigh down the processor on your machine depending on what kind of computer you're working on. So the first thing that I recommend doing is freezing these tracks. So we'll hop in here and do that real quick. All right, so we'll play them together so you can hear what they sound like.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
All right, so not bad. They're not terribly desynchronized, but they just don't have that clean, modern, polished alignment. So the very first thing I'm going to do is go over here and we're going to grab Vocaline. Okay, so now that that's aligned, you want to go to this the stem up here. So the second take, we want to mute that because we only want the aligned vocal coming through. And so now we're going to do another disc recording. I'm going to arm this track. We're going to freeze this with the alignment. There we go. And we'll kill this. And I always name per what step I'm on in processing. So this is KES2 aligned. And then we're going to connect this or route it here. We'll disarm that and get rid of Vocaline. That way we don't eat up any extra processor. And there you go. Got an aligned vocal. So now that everything is aligned, the next step is going to be pitch correction. You could use a real-time tuner like Antares Auto Tune, or I believe FL Studio has a native plugin that's similar to Auto Tune called Pitcher. But if you really want nice, clean vocals, you need to use a pitch editor like Newtone or Melodyne. So that's what we're going to do next. All right, so now let's have a listen to the tuned and aligned vocals.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
Okay, so now we're getting to the fun stuff. We're going to hop over here to the first instance of her first take. We'll go ahead and mute take 2. That way we can focus exclusively on this one stem. So anytime I'm processing vocals, the very first thing I'm going to do is grab an 1176 Revision E compressor. You can find these from Waves. You can also find them from UAD. I highly recommend the UAD plugins. They're top notch, and I'll be making another video about why they're worth the money. So after the 1176, we also want to park a LA2A Silver right after that. And I'm going to explain why some of this is here in a minute. And then I am going to also apply Maximus to this. Now, Maximus is a plugin that is native to FL Studio. You would not be able to use this in other DAWs, but I will give you an alternative for this as we proceed. All right, so the very first thing we want to do is just listen to the 1176. So we'll mute these 2 plugins, and we're going to play through and watch this VU meter.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
Okay, so actually let's back out here real quick. So the 1176 compressor is vastly different from the LA2A because it deals in microseconds versus milliseconds. So we're talking 1,000 times more accurate than the LA2A. And we're using this to grab your fast transients of this before we even start touching it with the LA2A. And there's some differences in the way this plugin works that we need to explain also. So right here, you have your ratio section, and this determines how many decibels of reduction are applied for however many decibels go over the threshold. But what a lot of people don't know is that as you increase your ratio, you also soften the knee of this compressor, and that's important. That means that it starts engaging sooner, and it doesn't actually get up to 12 decibels of reduction until you're crossing that threshold like crazy. So now that we've got our soft knee, let's look at what the VU meter does.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So not even touching the signal anymore. So we're going to push this up a little bit. I'm going to get about 30 decibels of input.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So I want about 7 or 8 decibels, between 7 and 10 decibels of reduction on a vocal, because we're really trying to normalize the volume of this and get a consistent volume across the board. So now that we've got these fast transients being captured by the 1176, now we're going to enable the LA2A, and we're going to and smooth out the troughs of what's going on.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So we want a little bit more gain reduction here. I'm going to crank this up a little bit.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
All right, so that's got our dynamics controlled really well. Now the last thing that we need to do here is we're going to go into Maximus. If you're using FL Studio, you want to disengage the compressors of the multiband section here. We're only interested in the master dynamic control here. So what I like to do is bring my threshold down about 3 decibels and push the vocal into the limiter first.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight.
So now that we're hitting that limit, now it's time to add a little bit of saturation. So our threshold is at -3 decibels. So I want to add about 5% soft clip. And then I want to pull my ceiling down to about right at -3. So the limiter is grabbing a lot of the transients before it goes into saturation. And then I'm just going to boost my output by about 1 decibel.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight.
Okay, so that about does it for the dynamics processing, except we need to de-ess. So I put de-essers before the saturator. And for this, I recommend a plugin called TDR Nova. This is a free plugin. It should not be free because it is absolutely amazing. Now, something to note about this, it is a multi-band dynamic EQ. And because of that, you're going to have these crossover points. So I like to turn off the bands that are not being used to preserve the phase alignment of the signal. Now, we know that S's pretty much live in the 5 kilohertz range, somewhere between 5 and 6. So I'll start at 5.5 kilohertz, and we'll enable the threshold here and take a listen.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight.
Okay, so that's grabbing our S's, but you can see the width is just way too wide. So we'll turn up the Q and start to narrow that out. So we're only grabbing those S's. If you look at these lines here, you can kind of use those as a guide of how wide you want to be. So I would like to be from about 4 kilohertz to maybe around 6 kilohertz, and let's try that again.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight. Jingle bells, jingle all the way.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and bring the threshold down just a little bit more. Take one more listen.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
That sounds pretty good. All right, so now that we've got the dynamics, so we recorded the vocals on the exact same setup with the exact same gain settings on our preamps. So all we have to do now is just copy the effects from bus 1 over to bus 2. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. All right, now let's have a listen to track 2.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
All right. So now that all of our dynamics are processed, it's time to gain stage these vocals. This is a very important topic that we need to go over probably in another video, but for the sake of this one, we'll just go ahead and do it. If you do not have a VU meter like this one, I highly recommend this one. It is by a company called Klanghelm, and it is absolutely great. I love this thing. It's like 15 bucks, and I'll show you why. You've got your trim knob, so you can adjust your volumes and everything. So let's go ahead and adjust the volume here. We want to get to about -10 decibels.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits.
Okay, that's good. And then we'll just go ahead and copy this guy over to our second channel. Mute channel 1, unmute channel 2, and let's see where we're coming in.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
All right, now both vocals in.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
And there we go. That's it for the dynamics. Now we're going to move on to temporal processing. Since I'm going to be using 2 different vocals and I don't want to copy and paste a bunch of temporal effects and try to blend a wet, dry channel and all that stuff together, I'm going to do a little bit of additional routing. So I'm going to move track 8 over here and make it into track 1. And we'll turn this into a vocal bus. And I recommend making it a little bit darker so it's easy to pick out. We'll take these out of our main mix and put them into the vocal bus. So now with that done, the first thing we want to do is grab a delay. The delay that I recommend is Dub Delay by Tau Filters. It is an absolutely amazing analog delay. So for vocals, I find that a wet dry blend of about 15% is pretty good. And then I like to bring the feedback down to about this knob about this dot right here, maybe just a little bit below. The dampening is going to roll off high frequencies. I don't want all my high frequencies there, but I want most of them. So we'll take this down to about 95%. And these are arbitrary settings that I've just found is a good starting point when I'm mixing vocals. And then for low cut, we can low cut if you want to, but I'd rather do it in the next stage. Now, a couple of things to note about this delay. You can have independent delays on your left and right. So this is doing 1/8 notes and this is doing 1/4 notes. This is synchronized to the BPM of my project. Or you can link them so that they do the same thing. When you turn these dials, if they're linked, both knobs will turn at the same If not, then not. So from there, we're going to open up M Charm Verb. Now, this is a freebie. If you don't have it, I highly recommend that you go grab it. So the first thing we're going to do is bring our wetness down to about 15%, and the room size way down to about 15%, or let's go 10%. Let's get it sound like a small room. The length we're going to say is about 250 milliseconds, and we're going to add a low cut of about 55 hertz, which is pretty much where the crossover point is for sub frequencies. Now, something to note about this plugin is you can cut or you can dampen. If you cut the frequency, it's just gone from your reverb. If you dampen the frequency, it's there and then it tapers off. So it's more of like gating that specific frequency. So we'll play this. I forgot to A/B our delay. So we'll go ahead and A/B the delay for you real quick.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, or the...
And now with the delay.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
So very subtle delay there, not super strong. And now we'll add in, we'll take off the delay and let you hear what this room reverb is doing.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
And now with the reverb.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
So very subtle on the room as well. Now we're going to grab a second charm verb. And on this one, we're going to make the ratio a little bit less. We're going to go with about 10% wet on this. The room size, we're going to make about 15%. The length is going to be about 3/4 of a second, or 750 milliseconds, or thereabout. The low cut, we want to cut a little bit higher. We want to cut that at around $1.10. And the high cut, we don't really want anything persisting beyond 10K. And now we'll take a listen to just this reverb.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
And now with them stacked.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
So still very subtle. Now we're going to grab a third and final charm verb. This one is where we're going to get our tails from. So we'll go with about 3 seconds or 3,000 milliseconds. Very, very minimal ratio of wet to dry. We're going to go with about 5% here. Low cut will be rolled up to 300 hertz because we don't want muddy tails here. High cut is going to be about 10K again. And now let's take a listen.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
And now with the delay.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
Now, something to note here is that since we're using these processors after our dynamic control on these two channels, it's introducing more dynamics to the signal. So let's take a look at the master limiter so you can see how this is behaving. So I'm going to go to our vocal bus and I'm going to disable all the effects so we can see what that waveform looks like with just the dry vocals.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the...
So fairly consistent waveform with a few cumulative transients here and there because we're stacking vocals. Now, when we add the effects back in,
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
So louder with even more dynamic transients there. So this is completely up to preference. If you want a more open, natural sounding mix, even though you've got rock solid vocals, you can leave it this way. And when you mix everything down, you can just mix appropriately and it'll have more of an ambient feel to it. But if you're going for a very pop sound, that kind of Charlie Puth sounding vocal, then you would want to go ahead and reel your dynamics back in. So if that's what you want to do, I use Maximus. That is my go-to, but you can use any multiband or mastering limiter. I start by taking off the multiband component and only working with the final limiter. So let's see where our waveform's coming in.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
So it looks like right around -11 is where we need to be. And this should be chopping off our peaks now.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, or the field.
Cool, that's grabbing those cumulative transients there. So now what we want to do is increase our saturation threshold to about 5% and bring this down to the same level, which was about -11. And so we're catching transients with our limiter to make it a little bit smoother, and then we're going to push that smoothed dynamic range into the saturator just a little bit. And now, if you look at our waveform on the master limiter here,
dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way.
So you get that nice solid volume level all the way across the board, and it has the added bonus of kind of exaggerating your temporal effects a little bit. I hope you found some value in this and that it's going to help you in future projects. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you next time.